Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good to have you here. Dry, beautiful Sunday morning. So we're happy that you were able to get out this morning. We have a number of folks that are traveling still, and so we need to keep those in our minds and our prayers. We are starting lesson 19, and we'll be. There are lesson sheets back there for 19 and 20, and then there's also a separate handout on the Nazirite vows if you haven't had the chance to pick that up yet. Let's go ahead and go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Okay, lesson 19, talking about vows, not vowels, but oaths and things like that. Okay, so the first question that we had here in lesson 19 was, what was a vow as described in the law of Moses? Okay, so the kind of the biblical way of looking what a vow was. Anybody have any ideas on how Deuteronomy chapter 23? As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and open to that. Deuteronomy 23. And looking at verses 21 through 23. And if somebody has that, they can go ahead and read that.
It says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which has gone from your lips you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth.
Okay, so from that, what are some characteristics of a vow that are that stand out to you as far as some of those words that are used to describe what a vow is? Okay, voluntary really stands out, first of all. You don't need to do this. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about whether or not you need to do it at all and whether they needed to. But God made an accommodation here, certainly, for those that felt the need to do this. So it was voluntary. What else about the time frame associated with it? Francis?
Don't dilly-dally.
Don't dilly-dally, yeah, okay. Yeah, and so there's a time reference and there's a volunteer kind of reference associated with it. So basically it's a voluntary sacrifice to God, and it's made with forethought of the consequences. And that's one of those things that God is going to emphasize in the vow is that, and Jesus, think about Jesus and his comment associated with counting the cost. Whenever you do anything, the decisions that you make, part of the reasoning process should be counting the cost. And certainly here with vows, that's a big thing. So the second part of that question is, what does it mean to redeem a vow? And we've seen in the New Testament redeeming used, and redeeming is used here, but what does the word redeem mean from the standpoint of a vow?
Fulfill it?
Just do it, yeah. If you make a vow, then it's a debt that you owe, and just to do it, yeah. So redeeming is to fulfill something. And when you look at the concept of redemption, that fits in, doesn't it? So here we have another example of a physical thing that helps us to understand the concept of redemption from a spiritual standpoint, doesn't it? Isn't redemption just the paying of the price that's required? Isn't it? And when we apply it to sin and things like that in the New Testament. So, again, something else that helps us. It's just fulfilling a vow. Okay, so here's a bonus question for you. What happens when someone makes a vow that they find out that later that they can't fulfill it? Oops. Maybe my eyes were bigger than my stomach in this particular case. So what do they call that? What does the Bible call that kind of a vow. And we tend to use this term from the standpoint of somebody who makes hasty decisions. We call them what? Somebody makes a hasty and maybe an over hasty decision. We say that person is what? Is that foolish? That's where I'm going up back there. Rash, yes, not the scratch rash, but a hasty thing. So the Bible calls it a rash vow. And in Leviticus 5, verses 4 through 13 is a big example there of all of that. And it is, for you to be rash in making a vow, and like, oops, I made a mistake, that is a sin. That is a sin. So again, this concept of counting the cost now, we're seeing, getting a little training, a little hands-on training on what counting the cost really means to God. So some of the things that you have to do in that Leviticus 5, 4 through 13, we're not going to read through all of that because it doesn't really matter all that much. But just to give you an idea, first they have to confess their sinful behavior. It was a sin to rashly vow, to not do something that you said you were going to do. And so you have to go through that process. What's the first thing? And we've been learning about this. You have sin, you got to get rid of that sin. And part of that is this confession. You knowing that you sinned and making that right there. And then, as you would expect, there are guilt then and sin offerings. If it's a vow to somebody and saying, I'm going to pay you 10 sheep, by next week. And you go, oh, I got 4 sheep and it's next week already, and I really messed up here. Sinful, but there's a guilt offering associated with that, right? It's not only sinful, but it's got that aspect of redemption. You've got to repay, and so that's part of that. The sin offerings and everything are based on financial ability of the sinner. So now we're getting down not at the congregational level, but now we're getting down to the individual level of individual sins. And how does the law fit in for that? So you'll see that as this works down, if you have the appropriate value and the financial resources, it's a female lamb or a goat, or if you can't afford that, it's 2 turtle doves or pigeons, or if you don't have that, it's 1/10 an ephah of fine flour, which is a very small amount, right? What was a tenth of what was an ephah? Do you all remember? Yeah, it's a small amount, yeah. And without any oil or incense even. And in essence, it gets down to a handful for the priest, gets thrown onto the altar. The rest the priest gets, which is this really small amount, sort of like a grain offering. So God doesn't have He gives everybody every opportunity to do what they should have done to begin with, and that is fulfill the vow. And God makes it so that there is a way with the particular poor action that you took, there is a way of escape that God provides through the offerings. So, all right, so question 2. What were the 2 methods of redeeming a vow? Now remember, redeeming a vow is fulfilling a vow. There's 2 ways that we could do that. And Leviticus 27, that chapter talks about this. So what's the first thing that you could do? Let's say I have a vow of, again, 10 sheep by next week. Okay? The one way I could redeem that, if I owe Penny 10 sheep by Sunday, and it's Sunday, what's the first thing I could do to redeem the vow, to fulfill the vow? Give you the sheep. I promised you sheep. I'm going to give you sheep. 10 of them.
The value of the sheep like
Ah.
4 sheep and then whatever the money for the other 6.
Okay, so there's a second way then that you could do it. One is just do what you said. The second way is figure out what the value is of the vow that you've done, and then you can actually pay that into the treasury. So we're talking about now just going into the public treasury associated with the tabernacle, okay? Because after all, now you have a problem. You're having a problem in redeeming this thing. So how are we going to work with that situation? Okay, so pay the prescribed amount that is in there. Okay, so question 3. So remember, vow, just do what you said, or do something that would be equal to the amount associated with that. Okay, question 3. How was the value of a person determined? You go, what? What are you talking about? Value of a person? Persons can have values? Yes, they can. And we do this all the time. It's not like, oh, you are only worth this amount, in chemicals or whatever of your body. We're actually pretty worthless when you look at us from that standpoint. But what we're talking about is what? When we're looking at value of what somebody is worth.
How much work they could do if it was a male or female. Males can do harder labor.
Right. Yeah. You're basically looking at what the person can do in its totality. If they can do this and they can do it a long time, they're going to be worth more than somebody who could do this, but they can only do it for this amount. Or they can't do that even very well because of their age or whatever. So it's based on the age and the sex of the person, and it's based on the potential value of the person's work. So when you look at the way the Bible sets it up with these valuations, you can see the 20 to 60-year-old folks, who fell into that group? What did those folks, what were they used for, or how were they identified? I mean, they're 20 to 60 years old. But what was their primary reason in a census for identifying this group? Fighting men, right. So this is the cream of the crop of the people that get things done in the society right here. These are the workers, the warriors, the guys that can pull the stuff, plant the stuff, et cetera, okay? And you see that the male, okay, because of the warrior aspects and everything, worth 50, the female worth the 30. But you notice that the 30 for the female is the highest of all, just as the male is the highest of all of that. So whatever the role that they have in the society, it's the gold coin of all of that. 5 to 20 years old, you can see, and then 1 month to 5, they even go down to 1 month old to 5 years old. And then, of course, there's those of us in the silver age of retirement. and we fall in there also. Okay, question 4. How did Jesus view vow making? How did Jesus view vow making? Keep your vows.
Or
That's
don't
right.
make one or the other.
Okay, so you remember this day from Matthew 5, in the Sermon of the Mount. Again, you've heard the ancients say, you shall not make false vows, but you'll fulfill your vows to the Lord. Is that correct? That's a proper interpretation of the laws that we're looking at right now. But I say to you, take no oath at all, neither by heaven or by the throne of God, nor by the earth. Okay, all of that. Nor shall you take an oath by your head, but make your statements yes, yes, no, no. Anything beyond this is of evil origin. And you see, Jesus is now getting to the heart of the matter, isn't he, right here? We're learning, and these folks, as they're introduced to these laws, are learning what is right and what is wrong, and carrying it out from a physical standpoint. Jesus has taken us to the end of this period of time, and going back and looking at the purpose of the law to begin with. Why is God trying to teach this? And yeah, it's all about the heart, right? If you speak the truth and you live righteously, then there is no need for a vow. There is no need for an oath. You just live your life as God would have you to live it, and it's in there for you. So that's how Jesus looked at it. It was from Jesus' teachings. Let's give an example of another Mosaic law. And I use the term here permitted, because isn't in fact what God is trying to teach through the oaths something that in essence he's permitting to occur, because and he's accounting for the behavior, as opposed to what Jesus is talking about, which is the true purpose behind the whole thing and why you should be doing it. Okay, so was there some other thing you can think of in Jesus' teachings that was permitted by the law of Moses, even though maybe God had a different idea from the beginning as to how it should go?
Marriage? Was that
Yeah, marriage. Yeah, Matthew chapter 5. God permitted divorce because of the hardness of your heart, but he made it, the accommodation there it was for adultery. And so, but he said from the beginning it was not meant to be this way, but for the hardness of your heart. And so, yeah. So God is, again, remember where we are. We're trying to teach the petulant teenager, okay? The hard-willed, stubborn, coming out into the world, mankind, all right? And in doing that, it's the method of teaching here that God is using that helps them come to an understanding of the spiritual maturity that they should down the road begin to get, and it's same for us. Okay, question 5. What determined whether a vow was binding or not? And here we go to Numbers chapter 30, verses 1 through 16. What's the general rule that's associated with a vow? We've talked about it already. General rule. Binding for who?
If you paid it.
Whoever made the vow. That's right, yeah. If you made the vow, it's binding for you to keep it, okay? Doesn't matter if you're a man, if you're a woman, what age you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are certain exceptions. And there are exceptions for the women folk. Daughter, wife, widow, okay? Now, why would there be exceptions for the women during this period of time? And during all periods of times, there are certain things that are more applicable to. You notice that it's talking about in the New Testament widows who are widows indeed. It's not talking about men there. Widowers, talking about widows. Okay, so go ahead, Penny.
If your daughter made a vow while she was still living in her father's house, and her father didn't say anything about the vow, knew about the vow, then she had to keep it. But if he didn't know and then found out, or when she did make the vow, and he didn't agree with it, he could forbid her from making that vow. And the same thing with the wife and a widow before her husband died.
Very good, very good. So the thing that makes this different is the fact of who has the authority in those situations. Yeah, the man did. In the case of the daughter, it's the father. In the case of the wife, it's the husband. In the case of the widow, it's her husband before he dies. And so it's just the societal way that God has established and organized the family is that the man has authority in that position. And that puts the woman in a very awkward. The laws on divorce in the Old Testament were placed in there because and why divorce was permitted by God for these situations, and it's mainly because of to protect the woman in the very vulnerable situation that she was in. So isn't it interesting? People will complain about the Bible and it's putting down women and everything. It's really the first place in all of history where women are protected from the men folk. These laws are all about making that happen, and so I think that's a pretty cool thing. You can use that; it's all right. All right. What were the conditions of the exceptions? Well, the conditions were because of under the authority of the man, and so. Like Penny was talking about, once the man in authority hears about the vow, he has to make a decision at that point, okay? And he could choose to say nothing to her. She makes the vow, doesn't matter who it is, daughter, any of those three right there. She makes the vow. If he says nothing, that vow is confirmed. It's binding on her. If he forbids it, then all of the vows that she's made are null and void, gone. Okay, and God releases her from it. Now, this is when, again, the timing is important here. As soon as the man hears about it, he has to make the decision. If he declines to make a decision, kind of, let me think about it, the vow gets confirmed. The vow is binding. Okay, and there's some things that happen. So not speaking against the vow confirms the vow. The husband's death doesn't nullify the vow if he has confirmed the vow made by his wife. So if he doesn't say anything and then he dies, sorry ladies, that vow has been confirmed, and it's still confirmed even though now you're a widow. Okay. And then this is the interesting one, I think. And again, guys, here we go. You can't procrastinate on this. There's no procrastinating. Otherwise, there are some serious consequences. Notice this. If a husband hears of a vow made by his wife and says nothing day after day after day, he confirms the vow. But if later on he changes their mind and then things are getting a little too tough around the house here, we're spending those 10 sheep are going to cost me a lot, woman. You know, and you can see it happening. And no, you can't do it. I'm going to forbid it. She's released from the vow, but he picks up the vow at that point. He's the one now that has to bear the iniquity for not paying the debt, and so. It turns into a sin on him, not on her, because he's the one that had to make the decision, didn't make the decision, and as a result, God places the blame on squarely where it belongs, on the person with the authority. Is that okay? So everybody understand how the vow thing works with that? It's pretty neat, the system God set up. What kinds of things, question 6, what kinds of things could not be vowed? Okay, so Leviticus 27 again, the last part of the chapter there, and give some examples. What's a good example of what kind of things could not be vowed?
Something was already commanded by God to be offered.
Okay, something commanded by God to be offered. All right, now that couldn't be counted because as being a volunteer thing that you're doing because who's it belong to? Yeah, it's God's to begin with. You can't give something for yourself. It's sort of like re-gifting something at Christmas time. You know, you can't do that. All right. So this is a fulfillment of a command. It's not a free gift from the giver. The vow is supposed to be a free will offering that you're giving. But it's not if it belongs to somebody else. And in this case, it belongs to God. So that's the first thing. What's another one that... This one deals with firstborns.
Firstlings cannot be vowed.
For what?
Firstlings?
Yeah, firstlings. Yeah, firstborn of the animals couldn't be... now, this is firstborns that could be sacrificed. Okay, so in the herd, the ones that Remember, you're supposed to pick out the 1 year old and unblemished, and you may have 4 or 5 like that, and you pick one out for your thing. Well, those since they could be sacrificed, those in fact would not be eligible for this free will thing, because they belong to the Lord already. The firstborn already belongs to the Lord. And so again, you can't give something that belongs to somebody else. Not a free gift from the giver. And now, unclean animals is kind of interesting. Unclean animals, could they be used for sacrifices? No. So you're stuck with this animal, right? It's this unclean animal, and you've got it. You can't sacrifice it for anything. What use is it? Well, you can still do something with it, all right? So you can either redeem it, right? So you can say, I got this thing, whatever the unclean animal is, I want to give it to you, you want it, all right? But then you go, so I want to redeem it. The way I can redeem it is add 1/5 of the value of the animal and then pay it to the treasury. That's one thing I can do. Where I may not want to redeem it, maybe I want to keep it and it's the pet of the family now. And it's not useful for anything else. But you still have to account for it. So you can sell it to the sanctuary, and then those last 2 things are not supposed to be there. Redeem a sheep. That was a leftover from something else. Basically, you could sell it to the sanctuary, the unclean animal, to the sanctuary for the value of its, and that's how you can not redeem it. All right. Something else. How about devoted things? Okay. And again, same reason, already belongs to God. It's this idea of a compulsory dedication. Now this one was interesting. You remember Jericho? Go open up to Joshua chapter 6. Joshua 6. And we're looking at verses 17 through 19. Joshua. And whoever gets it first can 17 through 19. Jesse, you got that?
The city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in her house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. And you, by all means, abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. But all the silver, but all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord.
Okay. So you see how God is, how this compulsory dedication here that is part of this, these things that are known as devoted things. So God has designated this. Another example is those that are dedicated to or devoted to destruction. Now, in other words, under the death penalty. Let me see, right there. For instance, remember the Amalekites and King Saul? What was Saul supposed to do to the Amalekites? Everything. And I mean, it was everything, wasn't it? The animals. Think of all those things that were sacrifice capable out of that. And as a matter of fact, that was an excuse that Saul used, didn't it? Oh, so we could have these great animals for sacrifice. But no, these were, God set them up under a death sentence. So these were already devoted to God. They're devoted to, in this case, devoted to the destruction which God ordered. And so, again, we have this thing, these devoted things could not be added into there. Another one was tithes. This one is probably one of the ones we think about the most. But think about it. 1/10 of all the increase belonged to the Lord, right? So you can use the tithe as a gift to God if you add 1/5 of the value to the tithe and then pay it all to the treasury. But you can't just say, I'm going to give 10% of everything to God. And for my normal day-to-day sacrifice, I'm going to use my 10% as my sacrifice. Pretty good deal, right? Well, God's cheated in that particular case, because you're supposed to do the one and not do the other. So again, it's all part of that in there. So for animals, every 10th animal belonged to the Lord, and you couldn't pick out the good and the bad. It was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 you. You couldn't say, the you that's the good one. Put that aside, move the other one over. What happens if you do that? If you try to substitute, both animals become holy. The one you wanted to substitute and the one you were supposed to pick. And they can't be redeemed. They belong to God at that point. So again, there's God's making sure that nobody's cheating in there. If there's cheating going on, there are consequences to it. So here's a bonus question. What was the principle of Corban that was discussed by Jesus in Mark chapter 7 and verse 11? And how does it relate to these laws that we've been talking about? Okay. You remember what we were talking about in Mark chapter 7, verse 11? Ken, go ahead, get us started.
Wasn't that where they were saying that because I have dedicated this to the Lord, this money or whatever it might be, where they would normally take care of their parents, and since they had dedicated it to the Lord, they were saying, no, we can't do this for our parents. And they were like breaking their vow, you could say.
Right. What was the vow that they were breaking? To do one, they're breaking another. Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, they're just not keeping God's commandment to honor father and mother.
To honor the father and mother, right. And they were finding, again, God was reading their heart, right? I mean, they knew the purpose, why they were doing this, and how they were using it improperly. And so, so this was, this Corban word is actually a transliteration of the Hebrew word for offering, is Corban. And it means given to God. And so this was a voluntary offering to the temple that was considered binding, whether uttered rashly or not. So they actually put more emphasis on this, and now you can see why. This is sort of like having a new law out of Congress going to help you. And then you read the fine print underneath and you find, oh, now I see why they're doing this particular thing. A little money over here into this pocket over there. And and so it was a problem because of the way that it was being applied. And actually down the road, Jewish traditions allowed this the money to be used for purposes other than an offering to God. On the surface, this is an offering to God, but a little added, addendum number 23, line 6, paragraph, subparagraph, A, B, number 1, underneath, asterisk. You can use it for other things too, which is the way they were using it. Okay, and then basically it was used as an excuse by irresponsible children in Jesus' day not to take care of their elderly parents, and that's what it came to be known as. So Jesus was very, upset by that particular one. Okay, question 7. What was the Nazirite vow? What's a Nazirite vow? And this had nothing to do with the city of Nazareth, which is what I always thought it was. Jesus of Nazareth. Oh, he must have been a Nazirite.
Dedication to the Lord.
Okay, it's a special dedication to the Lord. And it dedicates you to the Lord. So here, getting into the value of people again here. So name some prominent features of this special vow. What were some parts associated with it? How much time was involved in it?
It could be a lifetime or it could be a set time.
Right, so there could be a specified time for it, Well, or it could be as long as a person lives. Well, that's the specified time in that particular case. Yeah, so, but usually it's for a limited time, but there are examples, and, we're going to talk about that. And anybody could take the vow, right, man or a woman, and basically it consecrated that person to the Lord during the time that the vow is in effect. And then there were specific rules for the actions to start the vow, live the vow, end the vow. All of that was part of it. Okay, so what 3 things must not be done in redeeming a Nazirite vow? 3 things that couldn't be done. What's the one we think about the most?
I was going to say it's the ABCs.
Okay, ABC's got
No alcohol.
Okay.
No corpse. No alcohol, no barber, no
it.
corpse.
Of course, that's right. Alcohol, specifically, what kind of alcohol?
Anything to do with grapes.
Anything to do with
honey,
grapes.
dried grapes.
Very good, very good. So we're talking about who likes raisins here? Yep, sorry. Phyllis she hated raisins, so it's this fine, I'll be a Nazarite, you know. So no razor to the head, and then can't go near a dead body. Not even relatives. Now that one I find interesting. And of course, in the situation Samson was in, God makes no comments on how effective Samson was living his Nazirite vow. He just tells the story, and you know it has its ups and downs. And there certainly were a lot of dead bodies around that guy, and but there's no comment in there on that. But we see what the vow actually involved, though. So I'll leave that up to you to decide whether Samson was actually living that vow or when he was doing some of those things. So name 3 characters who took the Nazirite vow, and I'll give you the first one. Samson, there he is. All right, who's another one? In the Old Testament. Samuel, yeah, that's right. And who, from the New Testament era, still under the Old Testament, but in the New Testament era of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John section.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, very good, all right. So note all 3 of them took lifetime vows, okay? All right, so that's the vows part. Let's go on to miscellaneous laws, and we'll just keep right on rocking here. Question 1 on lesson 20. Okay, what sexual sin is forbidden by God in all of its forms in Leviticus 18? Every form, this is forbidden. And there are quite a few different forms of this. In the ones that are talked about there in Leviticus 8.
Family.
Say that again.
Anyone near of kin?
Anyone near of kin, and that is known as what? Incest. Exactly. Okay, so incest basically of all kinds is forbidden. And and the way it's defined is the near of kin that we're talking about. Okay, so what does it mean to uncover nakedness? Because that term is used a lot in Leviticus chapter 18. Uncovering nakedness. Can you think of an example of somebody that uncovered somebody's nakedness? Who's a famous example in the Old Testament of that?
Remember Noah.
Noah, yes. And Ham that was a pretty bad result for that, yeah. So, yeah, and there are other circumstances that were associated with that. But so what does it mean to uncover nakedness then? Well, you got this Hebrew word, irwa, and it means normally nakedness, shameful behavior, indecency, exposure of a person's private areas for the purpose of sexual activity or unseemly viewing. Okay, so anything that's associated with that is considered to be uncovering the nakedness of. That's why they had loin coverings and all of that kind of stuff. All right. So why would, for example, uncovering the nakedness of your mother uncover the nakedness of your father? And this gets into this idea. What's the relationship of the nakedness of your father to the nakedness of your mother?
Belongs to your father.
Ah, yes. Now, okay, so there is a relationship. Based on the relationship of who's involved with the uncovering of the nakedness, you have to then scope out from there to that family, right, that we were talking about earlier about the incest. So I gathered some different points here and put this together. It said, the whole body, especially the private areas, belongs to a person's spouse. Exposing a person's private areas causes shame, not only for the person, but their spouse also, since, like Jesse said, the two are one in marriage. And also, we're told to honor our father and our mother. And shaming them by uncovering their nakedness does not accomplish this. And so, the idea of shame, of nakedness being the equivalent of indecency and shame in a normal relationship. Okay, and the only time it isn't shameful is when? In marriage. That's it. Every other time, all other circumstances, it's shameful, indecent. Nakedness is associated with that. And if you uncover the nakedness, that's the act of opening up Pandora's box into all of that. So yeah. It's immorality, yes. Okay, so uncovering nakedness. That's what that if you notice that whole incest section, every one of those things associated in there was to not uncover the nakedness of, uncovering her nakedness, not uncovering the nakedness of, on every single one of those. That was the sin involved. Okay, question 2, 1 minute to go. Can you name a patriarch who did what was described in Leviticus 18 and 18? 18 and 18 says, "You shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister as a rival while she is alive to uncover her nakedness." Who do you know that did that of the patriarchs?
Jacob.
And how did that work out for his family? Jacob did, yes. He wanted Rachel, and he ended up Leah and Rachel. How did that work out for him? It did not work out. It was permitted by God in this particular case, and it taught a big lesson. There's a lot of chapters in the Old Testament that are dedicated to how bad that idea was. Go ahead, Jesse.
It wasn't his idea or intent. It was Laban's deceit. So.
Right. Yes. Again, God made no comment.
He just wanted Rachel.
Yep. Do you notice that God made no comment on the rightness or wrongness of that at the time? None. No comment on it. God provides the laws, but people were people. And so it's there for our learning. Okay, so let's start here on jealousy. And question 3. We made it to question 3. Yes. Okay, so we're going to start in lesson 20, question 3 for next week, and I will have, on Wednesday night, I'll have lesson 21, the beginning of that in the thing for you. All right, you guys did great for such a small crowd this morning. This is good. Appreciate that.